Released in September 2022, one of the most marketed features of the Fujifilm X-H2 was its whopping new 40 megapixel sensor, the highest resolution in an APS-C camera at the time. But the X-H2 is much more than just 40 million pixels. Over the past 4 months, I've put it through its paces. I've taken it to the top of snow-capped mountains and desert-like environments. I've used it to shoot landscapes, seascapes, wildlife, and astro. I've shot it at sunrise, sunset, and everything in between. I've paired it with new Fujinon lenses, old Fujinon lenses, and non-Fujinon lenses. In this video, I'll share with you my thoughts on the X-H2, what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and whether it might be for you. Hello! If this is the first time we've met, I'm Valerie Misa and welcome to my channel. Now, usually you'll find me out in the field sharing my landscape, nature and wildlife photography adventures. But sometimes you'll find me at home in my studio sharing my thoughts on a range of things photography related. So in today's video, I'll be sharing my thoughts on the Fujifilm X-H2 based on my practical experience having used it for the past 4 months or so. So you won't be finding any technical charts, tests or graphs. I'll leave that all to the experts. But don't get me wrong, while I think it is important that you do understand the capabilities and also the limitations of your camera, I think what's more important is your actual experience with the camera, how it performs for you practically, and your level of satisfaction with the results it produces. So in today's video, I'll be covering 4 main categories: design and ergonomics, resolution, ISO and noise, and autofocus. Now, these areas have been most relevant to me as someone who uses the camera mainly as a stills camera and mainly for nature and landscape photography and sometimes wildlife photography. So if your interests and intended uses are similar to mine, I think you'll find this video helpful. Now, I won't be covering video performance in this video as it's going to make it way too long. And I am aware of some of the shortcomings of the X-H2, from rolling shutter issues to autofocus. But I'll just quickly say, in the limited scenarios that I've used it so far, and that's mainly as a secondary camera to shoot really basic B-rolls, I found it to be pretty sufficient for my needs and on par or slightly better than the X-T4. So without further ado, let's get straight into today's video. So the most obvious design change in the X-H2 and its big brother, the X-H2S, has been the move away from the dedicated dials and retro design to the standard PASM dial design, which you'll find in pretty much all other camera systems. Love it or hate it? I know it can be very personal, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Now, if you've been following my channel, you may know that I used to shoot with the X-T4, and that's going to be the basis for comparison with the X-H2 in today's video. Personally, I love the dedicated ISO, shutter speed, and exposure compensation dials on the X-T4. It just made using the camera so fun. It really did feel like an extension of my eyes and my hands. And I think that's really important and goes a long way in terms of making the photography experience much easier and much more enjoyable. So switching to the X-H2, I really thought that I'd miss the dials and the tactile functionality. And I do, but not as much as I thought I would. And the main reason for that has been because of the 7 custom settings that's available on this dial. So with my custom settings saved and memorized, as well as 7 to remember, so that's not easy. But with all of that saved and locked in, I've found that out in the field, it has been so handy for me to quickly jump to my settings to shoot whatever it is that I need to shoot, and then just make slight tweaks and adjustments as needed. Now, a few other things that I do like about the design and ergonomics of the X-H2. I love the EVF. This EVF is now upgraded to 5.76 million dots and a refresh rate of 120 Hertz. And what that's done has really made viewing, the image through the viewfinder just so much more enjoyable. The image is so crisp, it's so smooth, and it's just so good to look through. I found myself using the EVF on the X-H2 much more than I used to do on the X-T4. Another thing that I do like is this chunky grip. Now, it rests in my palm nicely. There's good clearance between my fingers and the lens, and it just feels so balanced and good to hold. Now, another design point I have to give this X-H2 is that it is durable. It is durable and it is solid, built like a rock. I've dropped this camera twice. Yes, you heard me, twice from a tripod. Once at a height of just over 1/2 meter, and the other time at a height of about 1.5 meters. And in both cases, it fell onto pretty solid ground with rocks and pebbles underneath. And in both instances, I damaged my lenses. But the camera came out pretty much unscathed. No scratches whatsoever, and it's still pretty much in brand new, perfect condition. And it's working properly as far as I know as well. So that surprised me, but I have to say that perhaps what helped brace the fall on both occasions was the fact that I had this small rig L bracket on it at the time. So this L bracket allows me to take photos in portrait and also landscape orientation. And I think this bracket bore the full force of the fall on each occasion. And it's got a few scratches and nicks on it. Not too bad itself. So if you're wanting extra protection for your X-H2, highly recommend that you get an L bracket. I love small rig. This is built perfectly for it. Not that it's designed to give extra protection, but as I found out, it's helped a great deal. But all in all, it is a very solid and sturdy design. In terms of some of the things that I don't like about the design and ergonomics, I most definitely do miss the dedicated ISO dial. To change the ISO on the X-H2, you either need to use the D-pad up and down button or the back command dial. I found that to be so slow and so cumbersome, and that's been really frustrating sometimes when I'm out in the field and I want to dial in my settings really quickly so I don't miss that shot, and I feel like it's just taken 1,000 years to scroll through to find the right ISO value that I'm after. Moving on to resolution. Now, perhaps the biggest selling point for the X-H2 was the breakthrough 40 megapixels that they were able to jam pack into this non-stacked APS-C sensor. And of course, the Fujifilm X-T5 now also has 40 megapixels. So the million-dollar question, does resolution actually matter? Well, I think the answer is if you do intend to print and blow up your photos or crop in your photos a fair bit and you want to maintain, or you feel like you need to maintain, pretty decent quality resolution, the answer is yes, it does matter. For me, I do print and I also do crop in a fair amount when I take wildlife photos. So the jump from 26 megapixels on my old X-T4 to 40 megapixels on the X-H2 was a big draw card for me. Now, Fujifilm recommends using the X-H2 with some of its newer lenses, which it believes is able to best resolve the megapixels. So I've paired this X-H2 with the newer 18mm f1.4 lens, which is what I have on at the moment. But I've also paired it with some relatively older lenses, so my 10 to 24mm wide angle and also my 18 to 55mm kit lens. I've also paired it with non-Fujifilm lenses, including mid-range and also higher end Tamron lenses. And to be honest, I don't think it makes a huge difference unless you're really pixel peeping or you're blowing up your photos a huge amount or you're cropping in substantially. The level of details it's able to pick up is, in my opinion, not astronomical in any sense. So let's have a look at a few examples and I'll show you what I mean. So here is an image of the Wanaka tree which I captured just before sunrise, and I captured it on my 18 to 55mm kit lens. Now this photo has been edited, but for the purposes of this video, what I've done is I've removed all adjustments which I think could enhance the details. So I've not applied any additional sharpness or structure or contrast to this photo. And what I'll do is I'll zoom in at 100% so you can see the image better, and bear in mind that this is a photo that was captured on a kit lens, and look at the details that you can see in the soil here and the roots at the base of this trunk. Moving our way up towards the top of the trunk, there's still a lot of details in the textures and the lines. If you look at the snow-capped mountains in the back, again, some very good details captured here and throughout the image, really. Now, another photo I took in New Zealand, this was of Mount Dobson in Lake Tekapo. And this image here is a panorama, and I captured it on my Tamron 35 to 150mm, which is a pretty good quality lens. I'd say it's mid-range. And if we zoom in again at 100% here, I think the level of details that you can see is pretty good. Look at the lines in the slope of the mountains here, the details in some of the rocks, and the clouds and mist as well. So I'm pretty happy and impressed with that, and I think if you do print this, it would turn out quite nice. And this does work out to be quite a large panorama. Now, by way of comparison, I thought it'd be good to look at an image that I took with one of Fujifilm's recommended lenses. So this is a flower in my backyard that was taken with the Fujifilm 18mm f1.4. And if we zoom in to, let's say, 100% here, I think the details here are very good. If you look at the striations in the petals, you can see that quite well. The reflections in the water droplets, even down here at the base of this petal where these reflections are a little bit fainter and a little bit lighter. And then moving down to the leaves as well. There's a lot of details in the lines and the textures in these leaves. And finally, to look at a wildlife photo. So this is a pelican that was captured at sunrise in a wetlands area near my home. And this has already been cropped in at about 33%. If we zoom in even further to 100%, still a lot of details in the folds of its bill. So I've gone in now to 200%. You can see just in the feathers on its neck, there's still quite a good amount of detail and resolution there. Feathers on its back. This was captured on my Tamron 150 to 500mm. f5 to 6.7, so a higher quality lens than my other Tamron, but overall I'm pretty happy with the resolution and details on most of the lenses, if not all of them, captured with the X-H2. ISO and noise. Now, reading some of the initial reviews at around the time of the launch of the X-H2, there seemed to be a general question out there about how the X-H2 would perform in terms of ISO and noise. How would that teeny tiny little sensor handle all those pixels? Well, my observations to date are that it is on par with the X-T4 or maybe a little bit worse. And to be honest, I was expecting more. So for me, I am a little bit disappointed. But thank goodness for the great denoising software out there. Otherwise, I think most of my wildlife photos and my astrophotography photos would be rendered unusable. So let me show you a few examples of the sort of levels of noise that you can expect. This is a photo of a Kia that I captured in New Zealand, and the ISO here is ISO 10,000, so very high. I usually wouldn't go over 12,800, and I've taken a few at that maximum for me anyway. So again, zooming in to about 100%, the top photo in this case is the one that hasn't had any denoise adjustments applied, and the bottom is post topaz denoise adjustments. And this one you can see quite clearly on my screen anyway, just the level of noise in the background, and then also on the Kia around its eyes, in the feathers, and this is more pronounced when I zoom in at 200%. Look at the difference between the two. It is remarkable. So here's another example of a noisy image. This is an astro shot of the Wanaka tree taken late at night. It was a long exposure shot of 8 seconds and ISO of only 2000. But as I zoom in here to 100%, you can see just how noisy this is. Now, the image on the right is the raw, unedited version, and the image on the left is one that I've edited, and I've also run through topaz denoise. So you can see, for example, in the water here that it has reduced the noise somewhat, but it hasn't done a perfect job in this example. And I'll show you what I mean. So there is this patch here that's just above this island in the background, and it looks very muddy still. I wonder if it's because there was just so much noise there that even topaz denoise couldn't adjust it and rectify this image, or perhaps I needed to fine-tune my denoise settings somewhat. But it hasn't produced a result that looks very pleasing at all. It's still very muddy. It's a muddy mix of colors, and there's a lot of, seems to me there's still a lot of luminance noise that just hasn't been able to be fixed by topaz denoise. And in the raw image you'll see there were just a lot of very hot pixels here. Now I appreciate that if you're looking at this through your screens at home after it's been compressed somewhat through YouTube, it's probably a little bit hard to see, but if I zoom into 300%, you can see this patch here, a lot of hot pixels. So this is an example, I suppose, of a very noisy image, and even for a great denoising software like topaz denoise, it just couldn't really save the image, at least not bring it to a level that I'm fully satisfied with anyway. Another issue that I've discovered with the X-H2, which wasn't the case with the X-T4, at least not that I'd noticed anyway, is that when you're shooting in low light situations, and I mean low light in the dark astrophotography scenarios, the noise on the LCD screen is so bad that you can't even see your image. If you've got the exposure and white balance preview turned on. Now, I always have this setting turned on because I'd like to see what my live image looks like with all my settings in place. But when you're shooting in the dark and you don't have this setting turned off, then all you'll see literally is a hot mess of pixels. It's fairly well known that the autofocus system on Fujifilm cameras still lags those found in Canon, Sony, and Nikon cameras. Now, that's probably not so much a concern if you shoot mainly landscapes or if your subjects don't move much and are stationary most of the time anyway. But if you're wondering whether that X-H2 is capable for wildlife photography, which I enjoy quite a bit, I can honestly say that I've seen a huge improvements from the X-T4. Now, I understand it's still not as good as the X-H2S, which in recent times has improved even further due to recent firmware updates released by Fujifilm. But I'm hopeful that that similar update will be rolled out onto the X-H2 soon. So I'll touch on that a little bit later. But my experience with the autofocus on the X-H2 to date has been mainly when I've taken wildlife photos, and in particular when I've been shooting birds. I don't mean literally shooting birds. Please don't do that. That's terrible. I mean capturing birds, and mainly capturing stationary birds and sometimes birds in flight. And my general observation to date has been I've had about a 65 to 85% hit rate. Now, of course, that has been dependent on a whole range of factors. So, for example, my hit rate is much higher in good light, and my hit rate has been much better when the subject hasn't been lost in a distracting or busy background. So, for example, a bird isn't shrouded in leaves, in trees or dense bushland. But the other factor that I think is really important in affecting autofocus performance is the lens that you use. Now, some lenses are just really slow at finding the subject, focusing on it and locking on it, and other lenses do a much better job. But an issue that I have discovered so far, which seems to be more of a firmware issue than anything, is that I'll be looking at my LCD screen and it will tell me that it is locked in, the focus is locked in on a subject, so whether that be a bird or a bird's eye, and then I proceed to take a series of burst shots, and when reviewing those shots in closer detail, I would see that a lot of the photos were out of focus. Now, there's probably a user error element to that, but I think there is also an inherent firmware issue. And so my hope is that that firmware will be released by Fujifilm in time, which can solve that issue, but also improve autofocus generally, so it gets to a level where it can compete with the likes of the other major camera brands. So at this stage, you're probably asking, is the X-H2 right for you? Well, I can't tell you whether or not it's right for you because I'm just a gal on YouTube. What do I know? But if your main focus is to use it as a stills camera, having a camera with top-notch autofocus isn't important to you. You don't find that you shoot in low light conditions often. You find that you may need to print or crop in your photos a fair bit and maintain good quality resolution, or that having relatively light gear is important to you, then yes, for all those reasons, I think the X-H2 is a great option. It's great value and it's a great camera. But if you find yourself shooting sports or wildlife more, that weight isn't so much a concern, or that you're after more of a video-centric camera, then I think there are certainly better options out there for you to consider. So some examples of comparable options that come to mind include the Canon EOS R6 and EOS R7, the Sony A7 Mark IV, but of course, do your own research. At the end of the day, a camera is a tool to assist you with your photography, but I think having a tool that meets your needs and suits your purposes and works well for you makes the photography process so much easier and so much more enjoyable. So I hope you're enjoying your photography. Go out there and get that shot, and I'll see you later.